On Giants, Mounds, Monsters, Myth and Man, or Why We Want to Be Small, by Brad+Lockwood.
Copyright 2010, Brad+Lockwood, all rights reserved.
There, then, browsing more than digesting old black and white pictures of beards and buildings, Chapter 2 quickly caught my eye. The works of an extinct people. I found all of the proof I would ever need, the touchstone of those fireside stories and deep woods detours. That single chapter bore the description of a find in the town of Conewango on Cattaraugus Creek, just southwest, over the hills from where I sat reading, rapt. I encountered the following, quoted verbatim.
Near the residence of Norman E.G. Cowan, there was discovered, by the first pioneers of this section of sepulchral mound, nearly circular in form, and having an entire circumference of 170 feet. The height of the mound was about 12 feet. Mr. Cheney spoke of this work as, quote, having some appearance of being constructed with the ditch or vallum outside of the mound, as in the Druid barrows, but more accurately belongs to this class composed of several stages, as the trocoli of the valley of Anahuac, unquote. Within the mound there were discovered 9 human skeletons, which had been buried in a sitting posture, and at regular intervals of space, in the form of a circle, and facing towards a common center. There was some slight appearance that a framework had enclosed the dead at the time of their interment. The skeletons were so far decayed as to crumble upon exposure to the atmosphere, but were all of very large size.
How large? What followed were precise measurements, that 28-inch femur and helmet-sized skull, as well as other interesting relics, arrow and spearheads painted in glazed stones, amulets, which were, quote, thought by some to resemble the Mexican and Peruvian antiquities, end quote. Druids? Trocoli in the valley of Anahuac? Peruvians in Conewango? Thighs twice the size of an average man? Had this been the sole story of pioneers finding 9 giant skeletons hardly 10 miles from my home, I may have, even at the age of 8 and already versed in tales and terrors of giants, discounted or outright ignored it. But they continued, account after account, 17 total, detailed descriptions of earthworks, forts and mounds, too many arrowheads and elaborate artworks to tally. Not all contained giants, but many were described as having been, quote, changed by the hand of white man. There seemed to be no end to the wonder. Surrounded by forest fancies and first-hand accounts, my search for our earlier, larger ancestors started with Everett's History of the County, then continued at the Cattaraugus+County Historical Museum. There, in a corner, behind Civil War uniforms and display cases full of arrowheads and muskets, I was able to look into the eye of a monster. Cattaraugus County's Historical Museum houses a mammoth man, 9 feet tall and carved from wood by a supposed eyewitness to the unearthing of that 28-inch femur. There stands our area's earlier inhabitant, beside his assumed wife, shorter, but still over 7 feet tall. Towering, the sculptures still seem friendly. They could have been holding cigars outside of my parents' hardware store and equally impressive. I was addicted. Everywhere I looked, I found my fix. Where I walked, so had they. They were all around, under my feet, hiding in an undisturbed mound over the next hill. Glaciers, mounds, and giants. Natives, real remnants and people I could touch and talk to. As told, we are merely the latest incarnation of the giants who once walked this earth. In time, they would come to inhabit me. It is clear here that we, Seneca and whites, aren't the first to benefit from the bounty of this area, and we shan't be the last. Protecting the natural abundance that has attracted all races for ages feels a priority. Sadly, this view does not include the time or earthworks of the giants. This is partly explained by the reality that these lands weren't originally either of ours. The Seneca hold that they were purposely placed at the western door to protect the other nations of the Iroquois Confederacy around 1,000 years ago, while whites didn't even consider settling the region until the late 1700s. Still, proof of an earlier people, an advanced culture, and maybe another race entirely, remain, extending from Quebec to the Great Lakes and the Gulf of Mexico, following our Allegheny River to the Ohio, the Mississippi, and beyond. Tens of thousands of forts and mounds filled the valleys, focal points for trade and civilization along rivers and streams, with communication and surveillance sites high above. So many, too many, to illogically outnumber human habitation. And here, the region below the lake named for the Lost Tribe, the Erie, is known to be ancient, the apex, and Eden. Through folklore, experience, and simple sight, and long, long before actual scientific proof, know that this is where it all began. Once covered by a glacier that stretched as far south as Pittsburgh 20,000 plus years ago, an Empire State Building thick, causing a drought and making the Midwest a desert, the glacier then melted back to exactly this spot, our county, bordering Pennsylvania, refreezing and retreating until around 11,500 BC, or 13,000 BC, before Columbus, that is, gloating down on our valleys and Warren Hills, birthing Lake Erie north and the Allegheny River southwest. The Seneca say that a gargantuan race lived at the base of that glacier, from Conewango Valley west to Lake Chautauqua, until it melted. When the glacier disappeared, so did they. But no.
The question must be asked. How do the Seneca have a local story dating back over 13,500 years when they also say that they were purposely placed at the western door 1,000 or so years ago? As with any creation story, and paraphrasing Joe Allen Archibald of the Anthropology Department at the Smithsonian, and an enrolled member of the Standing Rock Sioux, whatever or wherever the origin, it must have a local connection for greater impact, urgency, meaning.
Sediment, hundreds of feet thick, fills our valleys, deep brown and laced with minerals, while boulders the size and shape of buildings cover our peaks. If there were an early civilization of man, huge or human, why wouldn't it settle here? Fertile valleys, rolling hills, springs and streams serving as an interstate waterway. Thriving is innate here. So why would anyone, earlier or lately, leave? Another mini ice age?
But no.
Though debated, the quote-unquote dark ages may have actually been dark, due to a volcanic eruption or downturn in temperature, reaping havoc on harvests and humans. Considered cyclical, climate change occurs every millennia, and now growing more intense with mankind's enlarging environmental carbon footprint.
Overpopulation, invasion, infestation, illness? Equally innate is how we know that our mounds were truly remarkable. As far as we were told, only Ohio's and select portions of West Virginia and Mississippi's mounds remain, as well as Iowa's, which have a tantalizing similarity to the more recent yet distant Seneca structure, the Longhouse. Others were preserved, ours were unceremoniously erased by our ancestors, but we still have their stories recounted beside flickering fires and during walks in the deep woods, purposely avoiding known, quote, Indian burial grounds, end quote, and yet ever on the lookout for a mound that may have been spared some 170 years ago. Not to loot, but laud, to look upon. Summon.
Coming up next.
On Giants.
Don't ask me to tell you where it is. All I can say is you'll know you're here and that it isn't the work of the French or us. Seneca, not likely. It's too old and not their style. The lost tribe I've come to find, perhaps? Giants?